Summary of the Lincoln Highway by Amor Towles. Condensed books. Overview. The Lincoln Highway is a historical fiction novel written by Amor Towles and published on October 5, 2021. It follows 10 days in the summer of 1954. The Lincoln Highway is Towles' third historical fiction novel, and it is a #1 New York Times bestseller, just like his previous two, A Gentleman in Moscow and Rules of Civility. NPR, Time magazine, and The Washington Post named The Lincoln Highway the best book of the year, and the New York Times named it a notable book. Amor Towles received his undergraduate degree from Yale College and a Master of Arts degree in English from Stanford University. The Lincoln Highway is a fast-paced and reflective adventure story about three young men from different backgrounds who are incarcerated together in a juvenile detention center and then released onto the streets, where their conflicting motives and moralities lead them to collide across the United States. Each of the 10 sections of the novel depicts the events of a single day, beginning on June 12, 1954, with the release of Emmett Watson from the Salina Juvenile Detention Center. The 10 sections are divided into chapters, each of which is named after the character whose story is the main focus of that chapter. Except for Duchess and Sally's chapters, which are written in first person, the rest of the book is written in third-person limited perspective. The novel sections begin with the number 10 and progress in descending order to the end. This novel contains the following themes and depictions: widespread physical violence, threats of violence, manslaughter, attempted murder, racism, emotional abuse of children, incarceration and corporal punishment of minors, financial and material exploitation of a person with a disability, the mention of a minor character's suicide, and a detailed depiction of the suicide of the main character with a disability. Plot. Emmett Watson is released from the Salina Juvenile Detention Center on June 12, 1954. The warden drives him back to his house, where he signs over to the bank the farm that his recently deceased father had lost. Emmett plans to return to Texas with his 8-year-old brother Billy, where he will use his carpentry skills to slowly amass a growing number of properties to turn a profit and start his own business. Billy wants to follow their mother to the West Coast, where he believes he and Emmett will find her, after discovering postcards from her indicating that she traveled the Lincoln Highway to San Francisco. Duchess Hewitt and Woolley Martin, two fellow inmates from Salina, have stowed away in the warden's car and present themselves to Emmett with the offer of driving them to upstate New York to steal a cache of money that is rightfully Woolley's. Despite his opposition to the plan, Emmett agrees to drive the two to Omaha to catch a train to their destination. Duchess steals Emmett's car and the sum of money Emmett's father provided for his sons to start their new life during an unprecedented stop in Lewis, Nebraska, where Duchess had spent some time at the local orphanage. Emmett and Billy make their way to the train station with the help of their friend and neighbor Sally, where they stow away on an eastbound boxcar bound for New York City. When Billy is left alone while Emmett looks for food, he comes into contact with a vagabond thief known as Pastor John, and narrowly avoids being robbed and thrown from the train. Pastor John is instead thrown from the train thanks to the heroics of a veteran named Ulysses Dixon, and Ulysses accompanies the two Watson boys to New York, where he acts as their guide and bonds with Billy over the story of the Greek king Ulysses of antiquity. On their way to New York to steal the money from Woolley's family camp in the Adirondacks, Duchess makes a pit stop to exact revenge on Warden Ackerley, the former superintendent of Salina, who is a target for Duchess because of his racism and proclivity for capital punishment. Duchess and Woolley assault him and leave him for dead, and Emmett follows them to New York. Woolley, who is neurodivergent and exhibits developmental disabilities as well as psychological disturbances, has the opportunity to visit with his sister Sarah while in New York, and she invites him and Duchess to stay. To track down his father's whereabouts, Duchess tracks down Fitzy, a former associate of his father's, and finds Emmett's close friend Townhouse, a former inmate from Salina. Townhouse is asked by Duchess to hit him to settle a debt that Duchess believes he owes Townhouse. Duchess gives away Emmett's car while in Harlem at Townhouse's brownstone. Emmett manages to track down Fitzy and learns the truth about Duchess's incarceration while on Duchess's trail. Duchess's father had framed him for a watch theft, allowing him to be sent to Selena for a crime committed by his father. Emmett begins to realize that stealing the money from Wooley's family camp isn't the only thing on Duchess's mind. She also intends to avenge his father. When Emmett meets up with Townhouse, he learns about Duchess and Wooley's trouble since Duchess stole Emmett's car in Nebraska, and Townhouse arranges for Emmett's car to be painted and improved in performance so that law enforcement officers on Duchess's trail who have linked the car to Duchess's crimes will not cause Emmett any trouble on his way to California. When Emmett discovers that the envelope containing the money that his father left for him is missing from the trunk, he realizes that he must track down Duchess and have it returned to him. Emmett is drugged and left behind with the young women of the circus brothel on the second floor of the circus building, after following Duchess to the circus on Townhouse's tip. Emmett is abandoned for the second time by Duchess, who takes Wooley and Billy with him. When Duchess becomes irritated with Billy, he takes him to the Empire State Building in search of Professor Abacus Abernath, the author of Billy's favorite book, who Duchess believes will not be present. Professor Abernath is determined to meet Ulysses Dixon, so Duchess, Wooley, and Emmett bring Professor Abernath to the itinerant camp where Ulysses is staying, where Billy shares the story of his journey, including the details of Ulysses Dixon's remarkable life. Wooley, Duchess, and Billy return to Wooley's sister Sarah's house, where they plan to cook an elaborate dinner that Duchess learned to prepare as a boy the next day. Emmett spends a long time trying to locate his brother, Duchess, and Wooley, after being left at the brothel, without the information needed to locate Wooley's sister's home. The sound of an engine backfiring announces the arrival of Sally, who has driven from Nebraska to check on Billy and Emmett after they failed to call her at their mutually agreed-upon time to assure her that they were fine. Sarah and her husband Dennis return home to find a raucous dinner party, and Wooley, who has been shamed and scolded by his brother-in-law and his friends, call it a night. Duchess and Wooley drive north in Wooley's Cadillac in the morning to collect the money Duchess has convinced Wooley he is owed. When they arrive at the Walcott family camp, Duchess is surprised and amused to learn that Wooley has forgotten the safe combination. Wooley tells Duchess he's going to take a nap while he devises plans to break into the safe. Wooley takes an intentional overdose with the leftover medications he was prescribed at Selena and the bottle of medication he found at Sarah's house. In the hours leading up to his death, Duchess finds him but decides not to bother him or interrupt his attempts to break into the safe, allowing Wooley to commit suicide without seeking help for the person he considered his closest friend. Emmett, who has retrieved his newly painted car and is ready to leave New York without interfering with the plan to harm Duchess's father, cannot bring himself to leave New York without interfering with Sally's desire to make a fresh start for herself, just as the Watson boys plan to do. Emmett abandons Sally and Billy at a motel near the Walcott camp, but Billy stows away in the trunk of the Studebaker, certain that his brother will require his assistance. When Emmett arrives and discovers Wooley has died and Duchess has broken into the safe, he is enraged and demands that Duchess turn himself in so that Emmett and his car are not implicated in the assault on Ackerley. Duchess tries to persuade Emmett to help him at first, but when he realizes Emmett is dead set on bringing him to justice and returning to Selena, he hits Emmett in the head with a rock and takes Billy, who has made his presence known, into the house, where he locks Emmett out. After breaking in, Emmett is confronted by Duchess, who has taken one of the Holmes rifles from its cabinet and is pointing it at Emmett. Billy emerges from the shadows, telling Emmett that Duchess isn't a threat. He can't read and thus can't know that the rifles have no firing pins left in them, as per the house rules, because the house is closed. Emmett takes the rifle from Duchess and hits him in the head with it, knocking him out. Billy guessed the safe combination from his knowledge of American history and his understanding of Wooley's family's connection to and appreciation for that era, which Duchess couldn't. They take the $150,000 from the safe when they find Wooley's note, which leaves them each a third of his trust fund allowance. Each of Emmett and Billy takes a bite out of the pie. Because Billy has made Emmett promise that he will not harm Duchess, Emmett devises a plan in which Duchess will inevitably be held responsible for his death, with Duchess's portion. Billy deduced that Duchess couldn't read, and that she couldn't swim in the same way that he deduced that she couldn't read. Duchess comes to, and finds himself adrift on the lake beside the house, as Emmett and Billy drive away from the walk at home, with $100,000 between them, and set out to start their lives in California. The boat, which has a hole in the bow, is kept afloat by ballast rocks at the stern, but the paper bag containing the Duchess' share of the money is also at the stern. In his determination not to let any more money escape on the wind, Duchess leans too far forward in the boat, which fills with water and knocks Duchess into the lake, drowning him. Part 1. Chapter 1. Emmett. Emmett Watson is driven back to his family farm in Morgan, Nebraska, on June 12, 1954, after serving an 18-month sentence for manslaughter in a juvenile correctional facility in Salina, Kansas. Gordon Williams is behind the wheel, and he has a favorable impression of the 18-year-old. Whatever series of events has brought them under our sphere of influence is just the beginning of a long journey of a life through the trouble. Williams acknowledges the difference between Emmett and the other inmates, and he knows Emmett feels remorse. Mr. Ransom, Emmett's next-door neighbor, has been caring for Emmett's brother Billy since their father Charlie died. Emmett's signature relinquishing his property is witnessed by Tom from the bank. Emmett's father took out several loans that he was unable to repay, and their farm is now being repossessed. In 1933, Charlie Watson moved from Boston to Nebraska to start a farming business, eschewing his family's privilege in favor of a life built entirely on his efforts. Charlie never had much luck farming, making a habit of making rash decisions and always seeming to be at odds with the weather and climate, no matter how hard he tried to change his ways. Following Tom's departure, Mr. Ransom informs Emmett that some in town still hold grudges against him for the death of Jimmy Snyder. Mr. Ransom suggests that Emmett consider relocating somewhere else. Emmett reassures his next-door neighbor that he intends to relocate. Billy arrives with Mr. Ransom's daughter Sally, and Emmett is hesitant to tell him that they must leave home. Billy, on the other hand, is adamant that they go to California. Billy discovered 9 postcards hidden among his belongings after Charlie's death, all from their mother, who abandoned them without warning in 1948. Billy has deduced that all of the towns in the postmarks are located along the Lincoln Highway, and he believes the postcards are a trail she has left for them. From San Francisco, she sent her final postcard, which depicted Lincoln Park. Billy is convinced that if they attend the 4th of July fireworks display at the Palace of the Legion of Honor in that park, they will find her. Emmett is accompanied to the barn by Billy. Emmett discovers the letter his father promised him in the trunk of his blue 1948 Studebaker Lane cruiser, along with a page torn from Emerson's essays and $3,000 in cash. Emmett perceives an explanation for his father's actions through the sentiments in the letter. He accepts his father's challenge to go out into the world and accomplish something for himself that only he can do, based on his special abilities. Emmett notices 2 people standing in the shadows as he closes the trunk. Chapter 2. Duchess. Emmett's fellow Salina inmates, Duchess and Wooly, stowed away in Warden Williams's trunk. Emmett opposes their decision to flee. They didn't have a choice, according to Duchess, because Wooly's medicine was running out. Wooly will become bluesy without it, according to Duchess. Wooly's treatment at Salina, according to Emmett, was not medicine. Wooly is always about 5 minutes late, according to Duchess, whereas Emmett is the type of guy who can see the whole picture right away, the grander scheme and all the little details. 36. Duchess portrays himself as acting in Wooly's best interests by removing him from an untenable situation. Wooly was left a trust fund, which Duchess informs Emmett he is unable to access because Wooly's brother-in-law Dennis had Wooly declared temperamentally unfit. The approximate value of Wooley's trust is $150,000, which is kept in a safe at Wooley's family camp in the Adirondacks. Wooley, according to Duchess, has offered them a $50,000 split if Emmett will drive them to upstate New York. They intend to steal the funds from the vacant house before it reopens for the summer. Emmett is reassured by Duchess that he will be back in Nebraska the following week. The Duchess has no reservations about deception. That's an embellishment, a harmless little exaggeration in the service of emphasis, says the author. Emmett is open about his doubts about Wooley's idea, and is adamant that he doesn't want anything to do with it. Duchess snoops around the Watson house while the others sleep. He rifles through Charlie Watson's desk, stealing change, and rifling through his bills and personal documents in the spirit of waste not, want not. Knowing that Emmett's father is bankrupt, Duchess searches the house for alcohol stashes but is surprised to find none. Duchess researches Wooley and his biographical information. Wooley is from Manhattan's Upper East Side, a privileged child whose family has a wealth of resources and connections. Wooley went to 3 different boarding schools before settling in Salina. Duchess reveals that he spent his first 8 years of life with his father. Harrison Hewitt was a con artist and actor based in New York City who traveled extensively. Duchess' father abandoned him at an orphanage in Omaha when he was 8 years old. Part 1 Analysis. The first section of The Lincoln Highway depicts Emmett's release from the Salina Juvenile Detention Center on the first day of his release, and provides an extensive background for the young men who will play the most important roles in the story. The adults who know Emmett, including Warden Williams, Sheriff Peterson, and Mr. Ransom, all hold him in high regard, confirming that his incarceration was the result of a single egregious error and not a reflection of who he is as a person or what they believe his future will hold. Everyone around Emmett encourages him to seize the opportunity to shape his destiny, beginning with this new beginning. Even Emmett, Charlie Watson's father's letter, expresses his approval. He does not expect his son to remain attached to the farm that he cherished. Instead, what Charlie Watson wants for his son is the same opportunity that he had when he left Boston and embarked on a completely different career path. The theme of harnessing one's autonomy and the spirit of embarking on a pursuit that is entirely one's own is emphasized by Mr. Watson's love of Emerson and the inclusion of a page from Emerson in his letter to Emmett. Duchess and Wooley's appearance, immediately after Emmett has read the letter, foreshadows the ongoing hindrance they will present throughout the novel, as Duchess relentlessly pursues his interests under the guise of helping others and promoting mutually beneficial circumstances. Emmett and Billy have been allowed to leave Morgan and start over, the new life that Emmett desires for them both, but his ties to Salina remain when he decides not to make Wooley and Duchess leave the house. The biographical information presented in 10 reveals the stark differences in each of the young men's upbringings and familial circumstances. Both the Watson brothers and Wooley are descended from genteel families, while their current status in terms of material wealth and family dynamics separates them. Their sense of morality and responsibility is indicative of a childhood in which they were taught right from wrong from an early age. The description of Duchess's father is included early in the text, allowing us to conclude Duchess's value system. While Emmett does not consistently challenge every assertion made by Duchess that he believes to be an exaggeration or outright lie, he is not afraid to insinuate that Duchess is not a forthright person. Though 10 does not include a chapter dedicated to Wooley's experience, this section begins to reveal the complexities of Wooley's combined developmental and psychological characteristics, and suggests that Duchess and Wooley's relationship is exploitative. Duchess's strategy is one of manipulation and deception, and Wooley's vulnerability in comparison to a neurotypical is crucial to Duchess's ability to carry out her plan to take advantage of Wooley's familial wealth and inherent generosity. Part 2. Chapter 3. Emmett. Emmett is the last one up in the morning, and he finds everyone else discussing Sally's breakfast. Billy inquires as to whether Emmett has ever visited the Imperial Theater, which he learned about from Duchess. Emmett follows Sally upstairs when she goes upstairs. Sally informs Emmett that she had no idea he was expecting company, or that he was leaving soon. Emmett clarifies that he was unaware of the visit as well, but that her father had advised them to leave town. Emmett believes he is to blame for Sally's dissatisfaction because the two had a flirtation that ended abruptly when he went to Selena. Emmett decides not to avoid the fairgrounds when he arrives in town. Instead, he visits the site of Jimmy Snyder's death on purpose. On the last night of the fair in 1952, Jimmy Snyder, a bully with a reputation for cruelty, picked a fight with Emmett. He began by teasing Emmett and progressed to insinuations about Emmett's father's lack of participation in World War II. Emmett slammed his fist into Jimmy's face. Jimmy tripped and fell, his head colliding with a cinder block. Jimmy's death resulted in Emmett's arrest after 2 months in a coma. Emmett chose to plead guilty, and on March 1, 1953, he began serving his sentence in Selena. Emmett goes to the library to look up statistics that will help him decide whether he and Billy should go to Texas or California. Emmett intends to use his carpentry skills to relocate to a metropolitan area and buy a rundown house, which he will renovate and resell for a profit, replicating the process and gradually expanding over time. Emmett is well aware that Texas is experiencing steady population growth, which will ensure the market demand required for his venture's success. Emmett consults the almanacs to determine California's status, concluding that the state is growing even faster than the rest of the country and deciding to travel to San Francisco. Emmett is confronted outside the library by Jimmy Snyder's brother Jake and a couple of his friends. As a crowd gathers, Jake picks a fight with Emmett, who refuses to retaliate despite being punched several times. Jake is stopped by Sheriff Peterson, who offers to take Emmett home. Peterson tells Emmett that after World War II, he saw 2 types of people: those who externalize their experiences by lashing out in violence against others, and those who internalize their experiences by refusing to engage in violence and instead tormenting themselves. Peterson explains to Emmett that he understands why he doesn't want to return punches, but that he can't afford to be passive for the rest of his life. Chapter 4. Duchess. While Emmett is away, Duchess ventures into Morgan on his own, where he witnesses Emmett's altercation with Jake Snyder. For his part, Emmett looked fantastic, Duchess says of Emmett's stoicism, and she immediately dislikes the cowboy in Jake Snyder's company, disapproving of the cowboy's instigating and the way Jake has cornered and outnumbered Emmett. That kind of level-headedness isn't the product of upbringing or practice, Duchess observes as Emmett tells Jake that if they have unfinished business, they should finish it. Either you are born with it or you are not. And for the most part, you're not. As Emmett continues to take blows from Jake Snyder, Duchess observes that in a fair fight, Emmett would easily defeat the other young man. The willingness to take a beating, that's how you can tell you're dealing with a man of substance. 88, says Duchess, referring to Emmett's restraint and composure. Duchess follows the cowboy around the side of the courthouse after Sheriff Peterson breaks up the altercation. Duchess pauses to explain his reasoning, recalling his time at St. Nicholas's Home for Boys. Duchess recalls Sister Agnes' chain of wrongdoing, in which the wrongs you have done unto others will be bound to you in the form of guilt, and the wrongs that others have done unto you in the form of indigitation, a value system that influenced Duchess and was further informed and instilled in him during his time at Selena. Warden Williams replaced the harsh and punitive Warden Ackerley, and the boys at Selena received a better education. An accountant's guest lecture on debts and credits, as well as the balancing of accounts, provided an epiphany for Duchess, who felt he had finally grasped what Sister Agnes had meant. The Duchess decides to exact vengeance on the cowboy for interfering in the conflict with Emmett when he had no right to. Duchess tries to explain this viewpoint to him, but he is dismissed and insulted as a result. Duchess pursues him further, picking up a board from a dumpster, catching the cowboy's attention and striking him in the head. Duchess claims he has never hit anyone before that point, and his main concern is the pain in his hand. Duchess returns to the Watson farm, now that she is feeling better. Chapter 5. Wooly. Billy and Wooly take advantage of the opportunity to socialize when they are left alone at the farmhouse. Billy asks Wooly if it was difficult to be at Selina, pausing from reading aloud from Billy's favorite book, Professor Abernethy's Compendium of Heroes, Adventurers, and Other Intrepid Travelers. Wooly claims that it wasn't difficult, but that every day at Selina was an everyday day, explaining to Billy that the regimented daily routine to which they all adhered made every day the same. Wooly, recalling his time at the 3 boarding schools he attended, decides not to tell Billy that it is not only institutions like Selina where one's days are monotonous and dull. Wooly ponders why people choose to make their days so routine, and why they would choose to live a life of such repetition. He recalls taking a taxi 3 hours from St. Mark's School in Massachusetts to his sister Sarah's home in Hastings-on-Hudson on the spur of the moment. His sister welcomed him, but her husband, whom Wooly refers to as Dennis in quotation marks, returned home angry that Sarah had not prepared dinner. When Dennis requests a private conversation with Sarah, Wooly is reminded of the awkwardness he always feels when someone requests a private conversation with another. Wooly realized that the reason boarding schools are so structured is to prepare men for the structure they will come to expect in their future lives, after overhearing their conversation, in which Dennis recounts the multiple requirements of him outside their home, many of which are on a timetable. After this private recollection, Wooly returns to Billy and suggests that a one-of-a-kind day would be a truly magnificent thing. Chapter 6. Sally. In her first chapter, Sally expresses her ongoing dissatisfaction with her situation. She calls herself a Christian and compares herself to Martha in the Bible, who toiled to serve Jesus only to be told that her sister, who chose not to help and instead sat at his feet, had made the better decision. If you ever need proof the Bible was written by a man, Sally says of the male authors of the scriptures, and claims that men truly do expect women to sit at their feet and constantly attend to them, with no regard for the effort or work involved in maintaining and tending a household. She believes that men have no understanding of the time and patience required to cook and care for a home. Those things simply appear for a man to benefit from, and they are unconcerned about the tedium and processes involved in achieving their comforts. She defends her decisions to cook from scratch, to use more labor-intensive old-fashioned methods to make her preserves and pies, because she believes in taking pride in the quality of what she produces. She believes in traditional values and enjoys her job as a housekeeper, but she can't stand being undervalued. She believes that greater effort distinguishes the idle from the industrious in God's eyes, and all she wants is for her efforts to be valued not just for the final product, but also for the philosophy that underpins them. She enjoys the sense of tradition that comes with making something from scratch, and she feels closer to God as a result of her efforts. Her only resentment stems from the men in her life's lack of appreciation for her hard work. She is equally frustrated when Emmett appears to lack appreciation after caring for her father for so long, who expects it of her, and who she believes does not appreciate her. Chapter 7. Duchess. Sally's remaking of his bed, even though he made it himself earlier that day, impresses the Duchess. He's awake, waiting for the others to fall asleep. He'd arrived at the Watson farm earlier that day before Emmett, and he wondered if Emmett would lie about what had happened to Jake when everyone saw his injuries. Duchess, who is perpetually dishonest, is astounded that Emmett tells Billy exactly what happened. When Emmett tells his younger brother that he did not hit Jake back but instead counted to 10, Billy smiles with approval. Duchess double-checks that the rest of the boys are sleeping and that Wooly isn't too dazed from his medication, as he plans to wake him up soon. Duchess looks in Emmett's pocket for his car keys and is disappointed when she doesn't find them. He had spent some time looking for Emmett's keys previously, but had been unsuccessful. Though he does not say so, his actions suggest that he intended to steal Emmett's car and leave with Wooly in tow while the boys were sleeping. When headlights appear in the driveway, he is interrupted in his search. Sally comes and goes, leaving a shoebox full of her homemade preserves on the porch with the name Duchess scrawled on the lid. Part 2 Analysis. Emmett's crime and his retaliation are described in great detail in 9. The nature of the crimes committed by the young men who end up in Salina is gradually revealed throughout the novel, and among them, Emmett's is the most heinous and lasting in its consequences. 9 delves deeper into the personal philosophies of Emmett, Duchess, and Wooly, revealing that the circumstances surrounding their crimes and subsequent time in Salina, however brief, left a lasting impression on all three. Emmett's decision to forego a trial for the death of Jimmy Snyder was not an admission that he had attempted to murder the other boy, because he had not, but rather an acceptance of the consequences of his actions. Emmett was well aware that he was prone to rage and that his responses were rash, but he had underestimated the consequences of his actions until the incident that resulted in Jimmy's death. He yearned for the chance to atone for his wrongdoing because he felt the weight of his guilt, even if Jimmy's death was unintentional. Emmett's motivation to resist Jake Snyder's assault stems from a vow he makes to Billy before his sentencing, which is depicted in later chapters. Sheriff Peterson impresses upon Emmett that, while it is admirable that Emmett has resolved to avoid violence in the aftermath of the incident with Jimmy, Emmett must accept that he cannot expect to live a life completely free of conflict. He is told by the sheriff that he must defend himself. Duchess has already invited himself into Emmett's home and assumed that Emmett would be willing to drive 2 escaped criminals to New York in his car. And, if Emmett continues to avoid difficult interactions, the opportunity for further encroachments on Emmett's rights will inevitably present itself. In his sections of 9, the Duchess's sense of justice begins to take shape. Duchess's life with his father was marked by constant manipulation, deception, and usury, and as a result, Duchess struggled to understand boundaries and individual rights. Duchess's attempts to make sense of justice and personal responsibility are embodied in the lessons he learned at St. Nicholas's Home for Boys and Salina. His father acts exploitatively toward everyone around him, including and perhaps especially his son, and his father's attempts to make sense of justice and personal responsibility are embodied in the lessons he learned at St. Nicholas's Home for Boys and Salina. Following that, he developed a personal philosophy based on the concept of debits and credits to others, as well as the settlement of accounts. The system of balancing accounts makes sense to Duchess because he can grasp it as concrete and definitive, as his sense of morality is not inherent and instilled in him from childhood. Wooly is preoccupied with the idea that life is just a series of structured days, each one identical to the last, and as he has gotten older, he has struggled not only to make sense of the philosophy behind this structure that everyone else seems to take for granted, but also to confirm and function within its parameters. Throughout the novel, Wooly's constraints become more daunting and terminal, and his desire for the perfect one-of-a-kind day, first mentioned in 9, creates a goal in his mind that allows him to justify his later actions in part. Part 3. Chapter 8. Emmett. The following morning, Emmett, Billy, Wooly, and Duchess leave. First, Emmett plans to drop Duchess and Wooly off at the Omaha train station, with a 4-day journey to California in mind. Emmett takes the Lincoln Highway for Billy, although there is a quicker route. When the Duchess asks if they can stop in Lewis, he directs them to St. Nicholas's Home for Boys. Emmett decides to go looking for Duchess after he bargains for some time for a quick visit, but then exceeds the time limit. Emmett discovers that Duchess gave the resident boys Sally's homemade preserves and locked the nuns in their rooms after following a trail of destruction. Emmett's car, Duchess, and Wooly are all gone when he returns outside. Billy assures Emmett that they have borrowed it for the trip to New York and will return it by June 18th. Emmett dials Sally's number from St. Nicholas's. He hopes to catch a train to New York, where he can catch up with Duchess and get his car back. Emmett recalls the day of his sentencing, when he told Billy he was giving up his right to a trial. He hadn't intended to kill Jimmy, but he'd made a hasty decision, and was now choosing to bear the consequences. Billy had then made Emmett swear that whenever he felt like striking someone in anger, he would count to 10. Sister Agnes takes Emmett aside and explains what led to Duchess's arrival at St. Nicholas's in 1944. Duchess's father had taken her to the orphanage and had returned 2 years later to claim her. Sister Agnes requests that Emmett acknowledge Duchess' pain. We both know that there is a goodness in him, a goodness that has always been there but has never had the chance to fully blossom. And she asks Emmett to treat Duchess kindly and as a friend when he finds him, despite the anger Duchess has undoubtedly caused him. Billy assumes he'll be traveling with Emmett to the train station. At this juncture, Billy's place is at your side, and he knows it, Sally says, even though she loves Billy and would be happy to care for him. And I'm sure he thinks you should know it by now as well. Emmett gives in because he realizes they should only be moving forward. Sally asks Emmett to call her at 2:30 p.m. on Friday before she leaves. Emmett quickly realizes that he lacks financial resources. Chapter 9. Duchess. Woolley reflects on Emmett's generosity in allowing them to borrow his car while driving down the Lincoln Highway, implying that Duchess has misled him about the situation. I did feel a little bad about Emmett having to make the journey to Lewis and back, Duchess claims, explaining that his only intention was to travel to St. Nicholas's in Lewis and returns the car. I could have saved him the trip if I'd known he kept his keys above the visor. Duchess explains to Woolley that if they can locate Duchess's father in New York City, travel to Woolley's family camp in the Adirondacks, and return in a reasonable amount of time, they will be doing Emmett a favor by bringing back Woolley's trust equivalent, which he will need for his California home. Woolley's neurodivergence prevents him from reading the map or following Billy's route. Woolley should listen to the radio, according to Duchess. Woolley keeps turning the dials, only listening to commercials and enjoying the depicted conflicts and resolutions during the commercial's brief duration. Woolley comments on how delicious it sounds when he hears a commercial for Chef Boyardee, and Duchess is repulsed by the idea of Italian food being served this way. Duchess begins by painting a detailed picture for Woolley of Leonello's, an East Harlem restaurant where he spent time as a child while his father worked as the maitre d'. At Leonello's, all tables are reserved in advance and paid for. Unless you ask for the house specialty, fettuccine mio amore. It's an exclusive location with a new menu every night dictated by the chef. As a young boy, Duchess had been deeply influenced by the impeccable service and exceptional atmosphere. The Studebaker coasts to a stop, out of gas, and Duchess interrupts his story. Duchess decides that stealing from a liquor store up the road is his best option because he lacks funds other than the change he stole from Mr. Watson's desk. Duchess agrees to give Woolley a dose of his medicine. He finds the tire jack and handle in the trunk and notices the white envelope Emmett had hidden while looking for a tool to break into the store. Chapter 10. Emmett. Emmett determines that stowing away in a boxcar is their only option. Emmett declines Billy's offer of his silver dollar collection in exchange for payment. Emmett is concerned about Billy's admiration for Duchess, so he explains that the story Duchess told about sneaking out to see a movie included deliberate omissions. Duchess, Emmett reveals, was the one who enlisted the help of other boys to flee. Duchess persuaded Emmett's bunkmate Townhouse to see John Wayne's film Hondo on a rainy night. Duchess refused to go any further when they arrived at an overflowing river. Townhouse's absence was discovered when Duchess hitched a ride back to Salina and went missing. As a punishment, Townhouse was given 8 lashes. Duchess has a lot of energy and enthusiasm, as well as good intentions, Emmett tells Billy. But on occasion, his zeal and enthusiasm get in the way of his good intentions, and the consequences frequently fall on others. Billy pities Duchess. It is clear to Billy that Duchess is unable to swim, but refuses to admit it, and that this is why he refused to cross the river. Emmett sneaks into the freight yard to figure out the train schedule, leaving Billy in the station lobby with strict instructions not to interact with anyone. Emmett approaches several railroad employees, but none of them are willing to assist him. Emmett is approached by a disabled panhandler, who tells him that he used to work for the railroads until his job caused him to lose his legs, and that he can tell him anything he wants to know. The panhandler reveals that on their journey to New York, the Sunset East train will have plenty of room for them to stow away. When Emmett returns, Billy brings up a woman with whom he had a conversation while Emmett was away. It does not make them friends, according to Emmett. How long do you have to talk to a stranger before you consider them a friend? Billy wonders. Emmett proposes a 10-day time limit, but they agree on a minimum of 3 days. Professor Abernathy's Compendium of Heroes' Adventures and Other Intrepid Travelers. Professor Abacus Abernathy's Compendium of Heroes' Adventures and Other Intrepid Travelers. Professor Abernathy's Compendium of Heroes' Adventures and Other Intrepid Travelers. Professor Abernathy's Compendium of Heroes' Adventures and Other. It is a large, colorful collection of stories from history, mythology, and literature about the lives of heroes. Billy explains to Emmett that the 2 blank pages marked U are the section of the book where Professor Abernath invites the reader to write their own story in the company of other heroes. While waiting at the station, Emmett suggests that Billy begin writing. Billy says he'd like to start in the middle of things, but that he'll have to wait because he believes their journey is just getting started. Chapter 11. Duchess. Wooly and Duchess stopped at a Howard Johnson's west of Chicago for the night. Despite his extensive travels throughout Europe as a young man, he had never heard of the hotel or restaurant chain. The hotel room captivated him, and he quickly settled in to watch cartoons. Wooly inquires about Leonello's after some time has passed. Wooly imagines himself, Duchess, Billy, and Emmett in a restaurant booth. Wooly inquires Duchess about the presence of others. Duchess responds by naming the mayor, Marilyn Monroe, Joe DiMaggio, and gangsters. The Duchess goes on to describe the proprietor, Leonello Brandolini, who, as is his custom, would visit each table at 8 p.m. and extend his warm greetings to everyone present. When Wooly asks where Duchess would open his restaurant if he had $50,000, Duchess suddenly realizes that Los Angeles, California, with all of its newness, glitz, and glamour, would be the ideal location for a fresh start. But according to Duchess, he must first settle his accounts and collect his debts. Chapter 12. Emmett. Emmett and Billy are waiting for their train to arrive just before midnight, beside the tracks. They open the hatch above and settle in for their journey after finding an empty car. Emmett comes across the envelope containing their mother's postcards while getting a drink from Billy's backpack's canteen. He's drawn into recollections of their mother as he looks through them more carefully. Emmett would never have described his mother as unhappy when he was a kid, says the author. Not to someone else or himself. However, he had come to know that she was at some point on an unspoken level. Her tendency to leave tasks unfinished, as well as the days in which he frequently found her, revealed her dejection and despondency. When Emmett was 8 years old, their mother learned about a spectacular annual fireworks display in the town of Seward, which she remembered fondly from her nights on Cape Cod watching the July 4th fireworks. When they arrived, the massive crowds had formed in advance, and there were no available spots. Emmett remembers following his mother up to their attic the following year to make last-minute preparations for the Seward fireworks display. Emmett's mother discovered the picnic basket they'd been given for their wedding, among their other belongings from their previous life in Massachusetts. The three found the perfect spot to sit and watch the fireworks after leaving early with their picnic basket packed. Emmett's mother began to show signs of serious incapacitation after Billy was born 7 months later, to the point where a local woman from town came to the house to take over the household duties and care for Billy. Her visitors eventually faded away, and she stopped helping out around the house. Emmett's mother told his father in July that she might not want to go to the Seward fireworks, and Emmett didn't think he had ever seen his father so heartbroken, but she went along with them because Emmett's father had made all the preparations. His mother engages with them, tending to Billy and inquiring of their father about his Boston relatives. When he saw tears streaming down her cheeks at the fireworks show, Emmett assumed she was happy and grateful, but his mother was gone the next morning. They were plagued by rumors about her disappearance, harvest problems, and financial difficulties, none of which were more burdensome than the knowledge that his mother had been inspired by the fireworks to seek happiness elsewhere. Part 3 Analysis. Duchess is simply carrying out a plan he devised before leaving Selina when he steals Emmett's car. Though Duchess claims in his chapters that if Emmett had left his car keys accessible, he would have saved Emmett the trouble of driving to Lewis, he fails to mention that he would have saved Emmett the trip to New York. Duchess has a habit of persuading himself that opportunities that appear to be too good to pass up should be pursued. He feels little guilt or remorse for abandoning Emmett and Billy without his prized possession. Sister Agnes attempts to justify Duchess' behavior by claiming that his father abandoned him at the orphanage for 2 years, as well as her belief that Duchess still has goodness in him, fails to impress Emmett in the way she hoped. Emmett has had plenty of opportunities to observe Duchess's current behavior and values, and he hopes to accomplish 2 goals by sharing one with Billy in the train station. Billy is outgoing, friendly, and warm, as evidenced by his train station conversations with Sister Agnes and Mrs. Simpson. Billy has told both women everything about himself, his family history, and his plans for the future in both of their brief interactions. Emmett's reluctance to squelch his brother's positivity and openness, while simultaneously instilling in him a sense of self-preservation and caution, is encapsulated in the discussion the brothers have about how long it takes to become someone's friend. When Emmett confronts Billy about his apparent fondness for Duchess, he uses the example of what happened to Townhouse, his bunkmate and close friend, to convince his brother that Duchess is not to be trusted. Duchess, in particular, employs deception and omission to present himself in a positive light. Emmett hopes Billy will recognize, as he has with other strangers, that the person he has grown to like in the short time he has known him has other facets to his personality that are not readily apparent and could harm Billy. Emmett's mother was suffering from severe postpartum depression after Billy's birth, but her depression had existed even before his birth, as revealed by the revelation of her background and the immediate circumstances surrounding her disappearance, as related through the memories of a young man who was 8 years old at the time. Mr. Ransom will discuss goers and stayers later in the story, as well as Emmett's mother's departure. His mother's feelings about Emmett's father's decision to pursue farming in Nebraska are never revealed, but her desire to strike out on her own and forge a new life for herself was strong enough for her to leave her current life, including her children, behind. Emmett hasn't thought much about his mother since she left, but this recollection causes him to admit to himself that his desire to leave Morgan, Nebraska, may be motivated by similar feelings of hopelessness and disconnection from the farm he and his mother shared. Part 4. Chapter 13. Duchess. Duchess describes the intensity with which Woolley focuses on and pores over the extensive breakfast menu, as well as the laborious process by which Woolley reads each item aloud twice before deciding what he wants and placing his order over breakfast at a Howard Johnson's in Illinois. When Woolley's food arrives, Duchess is taken aback by his lack of interest in it. Woolley has discovered that his placemat doubles as a map, and he uses it to locate the Lincoln Highway and mark the current location. The Duchess observes the surroundings, disapproving of the decor and dismissing the waitress and the patrons. Duchess calls Selina while on his way to the bathroom, pretending to have a British accent and assuming a false persona. He claims to be Warden Ackerley's uncle from England, and that he has misplaced Ackerley's address at Salina. When Lucinda learns that Warden Ackerley has relocated to South Bend, Indiana, she gives it to him without hesitation. Duchess strikes up a conversation with another patron in the bathroom, pleased with himself. Duchess assumes he's a salesman and expresses genuine interest in both his craft and his product, as well as whether he served in the war. "He couldn't tell if I was having him on or not," Duchess says. "So I added a little emotion to my voice." 183, he said, lying that his father was a traveling salesman as well. As Duchess returns to the table to pay the bill, it occurs to him that they, even though Duchess is in charge of all the money and makes all of the spending decisions, should be keeping track of what Emmett's envelope money has been spent on their trip to New York. Before the funds are divided between him, Woolley, and Emmett, he reasons that Emmett can be paid back the money he has lost from the total amount of Woolley's trust. Duchess notices Woolley has left their booth when he arrives, and a glance out the window reveals the Studebaker, turning onto the Lincoln Highway. Duchess removes the matching placemat from his place setting and scans the map's lower right-hand corner for the enlarged downtown area, noting that a statue of Abraham Lincoln is prominently featured in the town square. Chapter 14. Woolley. Woolley, who is not a skilled driver, is awestruck by the placemat map's simplicity. Woolley makes his way to the town square despite honking horns and admonishments from other drivers, parking Emmett's car haphazardly on the curb and entering the square. Woolley comes across a statue of Abraham Lincoln and admires it. What a wonderful likeness, Woolley thinks. It seemed to suggest not only the president's stature, but also his moral courage. Woolley is reminded of the 4th of July and the annual celebrations at his family home on a lake in the Adirondacks as he sits to admire the statue. Woolley and Duchess are tethered to this estate, which closes for the season and reopens in the summer to prepare for the arrival of guests. Fireworks, socializing, and competitions in archery, canoeing, swimming, and riflery were all part of the holiday festivities. Every year, the youngest child under the age of 16 was required to recite the Gettysburg Address in front of the entire family. Woolley's sister Caitlin informed him on his 10th birthday that he would be required to give the recitation this year. Woolley was intimidated by the daunting task of memorization, knowing how difficult it would be. His sister Sarah, on the other hand, instilled confidence in him by practicing the recitation ahead of time and breaking the speech down into smaller chunks to make it more manageable. He was a master of memorization at home, but he froze in the unfamiliar surroundings and the presence of so many people. He started struggling right away, and Sarah was the first to join in, followed by the rest of the family at the table. Woolley was reminded that he had felt the absence of his father at the time. Oh, if only his father could have been there, if only his father were here now, and he was applauded. Woolley becomes perplexed as he tries to find his way back to the car. Woolley is distracted by a man reaching into his pockets and discovers that the man is feeding popcorn to the park's birds. Pulling his gaze away from the road, he notices a police officer standing near Emmett's car, holding a ticket book. Chapter 15. Emmett. When Emmett wakes up on the train, it has stopped, and he assumes they are in Cedar Rapids, where the train is loading boxes of General Mills cereal. Emmett climbs to the top of the car and walks along the roofs of the cars, hoping to find an open roof hatch for himself and Billy. Emmett discovers that he is separated from the cereal cars by 2 private passenger cars, a few cars down. Emmett descends to the platform and peers inside, noticing the opulent decor and fine accoutrements of a luxury private car, which is strewn with the remains of leftover food and champagne. Emmett sneaks inside and discovers the room in shambles, clearly the aftermath of a wild party. Emmett suddenly notices that someone is inside, a tuxedoed young man dozing in a chair. Emmett begins filling an empty pillowcase with leftover food with caution. As he is about to walk away, another man, whom he had not seen before, calls out to him, assuming he is a steward. He asks Emmett to pass him a bottle on the ground, and is taken aback when he notices Emmett isn't dressed like the stewards. Emmett quickly clarifies that he is a brakeman. Emmett learns from the other man that they are Mr. Parker and Mr. Packer, two young men of privilege and means who are friends of a man in the next car, a Mr. Cunningham. Their trip to the train station is part of Mr. Cunningham's bachelor party. Emmett turns to leave when he realizes the time and that the train is about to depart. Mr. Parker stands up and tells Emmett to wait while slipping a $5 bill into his pocket. When the train starts moving, Emmett realizes the gravity of his situation as he exits the car with his pillowcase full of food. Emmett can't remember where the car containing Billy is as he jumps between the cars against the force of the wind and the rush of the train. Emmett surges forward as the train approaches a bend in the tracks, leaping as the train rounds the curve. He struggles to get to the ladder and lower himself onto the platform after landing on the roof, suddenly aware of how dangerous his actions had been and Billy's fate if something had happened to him. Chapter 16. Pastor John. When the man who goes by the name of Billy and Emmett boards Billy and Emmett's boxcar and discovers Billy alone, Pastor John looks at Billy's backpack and assumes he's a runaway, so he thinks about the contents of the backpack and how he could take and use them for himself. Pastor John engages in the obligatory small talk, inquiring about Professor Abernathy's compendium and implying that he is hungry. Pastor John hears coins moving around inside Billy's backpack when he opens it. Pastor John lunges for the tin where they are stored, grappling with Billy for it until he manages to wrest it away. Pastor John assumes ownership of Billy's property after discovering the significant value of the coins within, reasoning that surely it was divine providence that delivered this bounty into his hands. Billy has closed in on himself, protecting his backpack, and begins to chant Emmett's name, first quietly, then louder and louder. Pastor John closes in on Billy, driven by greed, insisting that the Lord's will requires him to take possession of the remaining contents of Billy's backpack. He keeps Billy in the dark about his plans to throw Billy out of the boxcar once he has stripped him of his belongings. Pastor John hits Billy to force him to release his backpack, and he's about to repeat the assault when another person enters the boxcar. Ulysses commands Pastor John to release Billy with authority. Pastor John tries to persuade Ulysses that Billy crept into his boxcar while he was sleeping and attempted to steal his backpack. Ulysses says it again, "Let go of the boy." Pastor John immediately begins picking up all of Billy's coins, which had scattered on the floor during the struggle, after releasing Billy. Despite Pastor John's lies that the coins are his and his bargaining suggestion that he and Ulysses split the coins, Ulysses demands that he stop and open the boxcar door, telling Pastor John that it is time for him to get off the train. Pastor John begs to be allowed to say a prayer before stepping off the fast-moving train. Ulysses ejects Pastor John from the boxcar in the middle of his performative recitation. Chapter 17. Ulysses. Rather than reclaiming his belongings, Billy simply looks up at Ulysses and begins asking him a series of unsettling questions. Billy appears to know that Ulysses has been in a war, that he has sailed across the sea, and that he has left his wife and son behind, even though Ulysses is certain that he and Billy have never met. Billy confirms that they are strangers, but he does know who Ulysses is named after, claiming that he believes Ulysses was named after the great ancient Greek hero in Homer's epic poem, The Odyssey. The boy's enthusiasm and insistence perplex Ulysses. Billy begins reading aloud the section of Abernathy's compendium devoted to the story of Ulysses. Though Ulysses had heard his name spoken 10,000 times before, to hear it spoken by this boy at this moment, it was as if he were hearing it for the first time. Ulysses is moved by the sudden and unexpected revelation. Ulysses loses himself in the story. Ulysses met Macy, who would become his wife in 1939. Ulysses wanted to join the military after Pearl Harbor, but Macy refused. His future was secure, thanks to a stable job that was considered essential, but Ulysses' guilt grew stronger with each passing day. When Ulysses was forced to face friends and neighbors who had lost relatives or had relatives serving overseas at a Thanksgiving dance, he reached his breaking point. Worse, he avoided service because he saw other men his age as cowards and deserving of contempt. Ulysses realized that if he did not join the army, he would lose his self-respect. Macy warned him before he left that she and their unborn child would not be waiting for him when he returned. He didn't believe her threat in his heart, but when he returned from serving in Italy, they were gone. Ulysses boarded a train and spent the next 8 years traveling across the country, never staying in one place for more than one night. Ulysses, like the Greek hero, is nearing the end of his journey, Billy reasoned. Ulysses, on the other hand, has been dealing with his feelings of betrayal since the beginning of the war. Ulysses hears someone descending the ladder from behind him, and Emmett appears. Chapter 18. Duchess. When Duchess arrived at the park in the cab he had hired, he was just in time to see a police officer writing down Emmett Studebaker's license plate. The officer approached Wooly as if to place Wooly under arrest when he arrived at the car, which was parked in front of a fire hydrant with the engine running and the passenger door open. Duchess intervenes, telling the officer that he works as a groundskeeper for Wooly's parents and has advised them on several occasions to hire someone to keep an eye on him. The officer deduces from his conversation with Duchess and the questions he asks Wooly that Wooly is not neurotypical, that he is not permitted to drive, and that those in his household are aware of his limitations. The two are free to leave, but the Studebaker's license plate has been recorded, and the Duchess chastises Wooly, emphasizing the importance of all for one and one for all. Duchess inquires about Wooly's medication use that morning in light of his behavior, learning that Wooly only has one bottle left, which Duchess takes possession of to ration Wooly's remaining supply and control his behavior. Duchess parks the Studebaker around the corner from the address at 132 Rhododendron Road when they arrive in South Bend, Indiana that afternoon. Wooly asks if their schedule will allow them to visit his sister Sarah as Duchess leaves, and because Wooly rarely asks for anything, Duchess confirms that they will visit her pending the outcome of his undertaking. When Duchess first enters Warden Ackerley's kitchen, he considers using a rolling pin as his weapon of choice, nosing around the kitchen and weighing his options before settling on a cast-iron skillet. Duchess raises the skillet and delivers a powerful blow to Ackerley's skull as the former warden sleeps in his lounge chair in front of the television. In Duchess's mind, the result is so pleasing that he considers hitting the man again. However, he is determined that a single blow should have killed the former warden, and he leaves the house believing his debt has been paid. Chapter 19. Emmett. While Emmett prepares the food he brought back from the Pullman car, Ulysses and Billy continue to read the story of Jason and the Argonauts from Professor Abernethy's compendium. Professor Abernethy's decision to include fictional and mythical figures in his collection, as well as historical figures, perplexes Emmett. Emmett wonders if it wasn't a mistake to make these people indistinguishable from one another. By combining them, it seemed to Emmett that Aberneth was encouraging a boy to believe that the great scientific discoverers were not exactly real, and the heroes of legend were not exactly imagined, he believes. Emmett is grateful for Ulysses' intercession on Billy's behalf while he is away, and he tries not to think about what might have happened to Billy if Ulysses had not appeared. Ulysses gives Emmett a private scolding out of Billy's earshot, and Emmett wonders what he could have been thinking when he left his brother alone. While he is enraged that a stranger dared to correct him, he recognizes that he had made a mistake, and he recognizes the immaturity that accompanies his resentment of being reminded of his lack of judgment. Emmett tries to figure out how he'll find Duchess once they arrive in New York City as the train moves along. He thinks that if he remembers the name of the building where Duchess's father works for a talent agency, he'll be able to track down Duchess through his father. But Emmett's mind wanders to the suitcases in his parents' attic marked with the names of faraway places, stored there before they moved to Nebraska and their sons were born. Part 4 Analysis. The time, effort, and trouble that Duchess has put Emmett through by stranding him without a car are not considered in his commitment to keeping a log of what he has spent so that he can reimburse Emmett from the total amount of the trust fund. His success in locating Warden Ackerley ensures that he will be able to complete one step of his larger mission to balance his accounts, and he will do so while driving Emmett's car. Duchess has allowed Woolley to flee with the car and draw more attention to the Studebaker by leaving him alone. Woolley's brief excursion to the Abraham Lincoln statue on his own reveals his limitations in his ability to function independently. Woolley struggles to maintain focus, navigate short trips effectively, even with the use of a simple map, and process the world around him effectively despite his poor driving skills. His reliance on the medication hurts his ability to think clearly. Duchess decides to ration the medication for selfish reasons. He can't be of use to Duchess without Woolley's relative attentiveness, and if Woolley is over-medicated or under-medicated, he becomes a burden. A closer look at Woolley's family traditions in 7 reveals the importance of American history in their collective understanding of themselves and their place in society. Woolley, feeling disoriented and missing his father, seeks out the Lincoln statue, which reminds him of the warmth he felt when his family joined him in reciting the Gettysburg Address the summer he turned 10. This rallying of his family's support took place at the Adirondack home to which he and Duchess are tethered, and it is implied throughout the novel that the majority of Woolley's happy memories took place there, so it is a source of comfort and peace for him. Duchess enjoys hitting Warden Ackerley with the skillet, despite claiming that he had never hit anyone before striking the cowboy across the head with the board. Duchess is convinced that the single blow killed him, and that this is the former warden's just punishment for all the beatings he delivered. Warden Ackerley delivered the severe corporal punishment to Townhouse as a result of Duchess's return. On a rainy night, he and Townhouse left to see Hondo. Given that he will soon pay a visit to Townhouse to allow Townhouse to exact his punishment, it is likely that the particular beating Townhouse received, for which Duchess bears some responsibility, was factored into Duchess' decision that the warden deserved to die for his mistreatment of his prisoners. While Emmett is quick to pass judgment on Misters Packer and Parker, feeling condescension toward the two young men, whose debauchery and hedonism have left them in such a deplorable state, he is quickly humbled when he meets Ulysses. Billy is vulnerable, not only because of his friendliness and willingness to give people the benefit of the doubt, but also because he is an 8-year-old boy. If Ulysses hadn't intervened, he would have been robbed, physically assaulted, or worse by Pastor John if he had been left alone. Emmett's carelessness in leaving him alone in the boxcar reveals that, despite what he has learned in Salina, Emmett's life is largely shaped by his youth and upbringing in a safe rural town where threats like those posed by Pastor John were uncommon. Though Emmett resents Ulysses' chastisement, he has the maturity and insight to recognize that his rage stems from his shame at realizing Ulysses is correct, rather than a belief that a stranger has no right to correct him. Emmett develops jealousy for Ulysses, who quickly develops a kinship and understanding with Billy that Emmett does not share. Although Billy was completely absorbed in Professor Abernathy's compendium and had shared its contents with Woolley, Sister Agnes, and Mrs. Simpson, Emmett had not inquired about it until they were sitting in the train station. The recognition of similarities between the great Ulysses and Ulysses Dixon, as well as Ulysses' interest in the parallels between his life and the King of Ithaca's, fortify an instantaneous bond between Billy and Ulysses, a bond that Emmett is unaware of. Part 5. Chapter 20. Duchess. Duchess has arrived in Manhattan at the Sunshine Hotel, a shady establishment where he spent 4 years with his father before his incarceration at Salina. They haven't seen each other in 2 years, but when Duchess knocks on the door of room 42, he is surprised to find a stranger there. The old man has no idea where Duchess's father has gone, but he does present Duchess with a box that his father had left in the room. It's one of his father's 6 boxes, each containing the personal effects of a different Shakespearean character he played. A dagger, an earring, stage makeup, and a false goatee are all contained in this box labeled O for Othello. These boxes were extremely valuable to his father, particularly this box from Othello, so Duchess knows that if it has been left behind, it can only mean that his father hastily left. The man who is currently occupying the room has only been there since Monday, and Duchess believes his father left after receiving a call from Selina alerting him to his son's escape. Duchess stops by room 49, which he recognizes, and lingers for a moment in the open door before heading to the lobby to find Wooly. After securing 2 rooms, Duchess inquires of the clerk about Harrison Hewitt's whereabouts. The clerk is unsure, but advises Duchess to contact another former resident, Fitzy Fitzwilliams, a name Duchess is familiar with. At the Sunshine Hotel, Fitzy had lived directly across from Duchess and his father. Fitzy had taken up residence at the establishment following his social downfall from celebrity and success as New York's premier Santa, catering exclusively to the wealthy elite, to the status of a communist-sympathizing pariah. Fitzwilliams will almost certainly know where his father is, according to Duchess. Chapter 21. Emmett. When the Watson boys' boxcar arrives in New York City, Ulysses acts as their guide, assisting them in carefully navigating their way to a camp that Ulysses has frequented during his years on the rails. Emmett has explained his plans to track down Duchess through his father's talent agency, and he has arranged for Billy to stay with Ulysses while he does so. Emmett is impatient with Ulysses, who takes the lead due to his experience and knowledge of the city and the camp they are visiting. Ulysses is irritated by Emmett's interrogation, and when Billy stops to admire the view and Emmett and Ulysses notice that he is out of sight for a brief moment, Ulysses becomes enraged. Ulysses emphasizes to Billy the importance of staying within touching distance of either Emmett or himself at all times. As they make their way to the camp, Billy is drawn in by the sight of the Empire State Building and continues to marvel at the sights of the city around them. Ulysses sneaks them into a building that the train cars pass through, using the boxcars as cover until they reach an abandoned section of track that is fenced off. They arrive at an encampment of makeshift shelters after passing through a hole in the fence. Ulysses greets a man he calls Stu, who is taken aback by the fact that Ulysses is surrounded by others. Ulysses finds them an empty campsite and asks Stu to cook them a meal. Emmett steps in and tries to cover the cost for all 3 when he sees Ulysses reaching for his belongings as if to pay for their food. When Emmett takes it out of his pocket, he quickly realizes that the bill Mr. Parker placed in his pocket was not $5, but $50. Ulysses chastises Emmett for not putting it away. Billy and Emmett eat an expertly prepared chili while sitting by the fire and chatting with 2 of the camp's residents. When Billy is once again overly forthcoming about their plans to pick up their car and head out to California, and one of the men begins asking questions that set off alarm bells for Ulysses, Ulysses quickly intimidates the man and his companion from the fireside, glowering at Emmett to impress upon him how foolish it is for Emmett to allow Billy to be so forthright about their situation. Chapter 22. Wooly. Wooly is dissatisfied with his current location in Manhattan, which he considers terribly permanent, and absolutely sick, filled with expectations. He is overwhelmed and disoriented by the bustling, densely populated city. Similarly, Wooly has always been overwhelmed by the volume of news and events that he believes people in Manhattan are obligated to be informed about, things you are expected not only to be knowledgeable about, but to have an opinion that you could articulate at a moment's notice, a pressure he finds impossible to manage. Wooly is pleased to discover that the newspaper vendor who happens by is selling not only the papers of the day, but also newspapers from the previous 3 days while waiting for Duchess in the Sunshine Hotel lobby. Although the vendor's price for all 3 papers is a nickel, Wooly cheerfully hands him several bills that he finds in Mr. Watson's pockets, telling him he can keep the change. Wooly pores over the papers in the evening, giving himself an extra dose of his medicine, and reads about the city's civil defense testing, transfixed by a published photo of Broadway from the evacuated test area, the streets empty and serene. Chapter 23. Duchess. Duchess learns from Bernie at the Sunshine Hotel that his father and Fitzy have a habit of starting their heavy drinking each night around 8 p.m. at the Anchor Bar, so he sets up shop and waits. Fitzy is startled to see Duchess approaching his booth just as he is about to take his first drink. Fitzy comments on how much Duchess has matured, and Duchess blames it on the hard labor he has endured, a deliberate reference to his time in Salina. Duchess tells Fitzy that he is looking for his father, that they have unfinished business, and that Duchess believes Fitzy would know more about his father's whereabouts than anyone else. Fitzy claims he hasn't seen the Duke of Duchess' father in weeks. Duchess goes to the bar to get a bottle of Fitzy's favorite drink, assuming that if he gives him what he wants, Fitzy will be more likely to reveal his father's location as the alcohol takes effect. To gauge Fitzy's reactions, Duchess begins to allude to the circumstances of his incarceration, emphasizing the words swore and thieves. "I'm so sorry, Duchess. I'm sorry I put those things about you in that statement," Fitzy finally says. "I apologize for signing it." Fitzy starts making excuses for why he acted the way he did. Duchess goes silent, and he realizes Fitzy is afraid of him. Taking advantage of Fitzy's fear, Duchess issues a veiled threat, explaining that despite having wronged him, if Fitzy told him where his father had gone, he would consider them equal. "I'll have to use my imagination to think of some other way for the two of us to settle up," Duchess tells him, if that is not the case. Chapter 24. Sally. Sally is speeding down the road in her Betty pickup when she comes to a halt at the fence, where she discovers her father in the field with two of his employees. Her father warns her that if she keeps driving her truck like this, it won't last long, and he won't help her fix it. Sally's father retorts that she knows her truck and her father, that she knows what to expect from both, and that she should get on with whatever she has come to say. She pulls out the for sale sign from Emmett and Billy's house and inquires as to why she found it in the trash. Sally confronts her father about buying the Watson home, saying, "The speed with which you bought the place makes one wonder just how long you've been lying in wait to do so," and suggesting that her father may have assisted Mr. Watson during the time the family was failing. Her father dismisses his employees and addresses his daughter after they have left. He explains that due to Charlie Watson's lack of skill and the family's financial struggles as a result, the farm was bound to come up for sale, and it's only natural that a rancher would try to expand his acreage. Sally counters his argument by reminding her father that he was the one who pushed Emmett out of town and into selling the property to the bank, demonstrating that he was acting in his own best interests. Mr. Ransom takes advantage of the opportunity to address the issue of his daughter and Emmett by telling Sally that Emmett, like his mother, would never stay on the farm and was eager to embrace the opportunity to make a life elsewhere. Sally challenges her father's comparisons of people to stayers and goers and asks which she is. Sally's father tells her that he regrets being so permissive with her after her mother died, that she has become willful and unsuited to matrimony, and she is outraged by his audacity in characterizing her in this way. She gets back into her truck, screams up to the front porch, and finds Sheriff Peterson waiting for her. Chapter 25. Ulysses. Stu approaches Ulysses as he sits by the fire, asking if the Watson boys are leaving the next day. When Stu says he'll keep their bedding for them, he's taken aback when Ulysses asks for his as well, even though Ulysses is a man who never stays more than one night anywhere. Billy's logic about friendship, which he had shared with Ulysses earlier, made the situation seem reasonable to Ulysses. If Ulysses stayed another day in Billy's company, it would be their third day together, and they would have progressed from acquaintances to friends. Part 5 Analysis. While Duchess relaxes while visiting his old home in search of his father, Emmett's inexperience and Wooley's discomfort with Manhattan are evident in their respective chapters. Though Emmett is concerned about his brother's naivete, he is discovered to be lacking in certain skills that would have made their survival in Manhattan nearly impossible if Ulysses had not arrived. Emmett's plan to find Duchess's father is sound, but without Ulysses' availability and willingness to volunteer for the task, the opportunity to do so without Billy would not have presented itself. While Woolley has seen too much of Manhattan and has decided that he does not belong there, Emmett has seen enough in just a few hours. Unlike the situation he found himself in when he was arrested in Manhattan and sent to Salina, Duchess returns to the city with some power and leverage. Fitzy's observation that Duchess is all grown up is more than a simple observation of her physical stature. Duchess has also had time to reflect on those who have wronged him, and Fitzy is on that list because he colludes with the Duke's father. There's something about Duchess's carriage and presence that tells Fitzy that she's someone to be afraid of. Fitzy's hesitancy and guardedness show that he still cares about Harrison, but that love isn't enough for him to risk his safety to protect his friend. Duchess' narrative and Fitzy's reactions both convey Duchess' willingness to use violence to find out where his father is, and Fitzy believes Duchess will follow through on his threat to extract the information by any means necessary. Duchess has embraced what he observed and honed similar skills during his time at Salina, where he was constantly allowed to watch his father take advantage of others and exploit circumstances for his gain. For the first time, Duchess has the upper hand when he appears at the anchor. Harrison Hewitt's disappearance from Manhattan after learning of Duchess's escape reveals not only Hewitt's admission that he had wronged his son, but also his assumption that his son would seek his father in New York. When her father chastises her for the strength of her personality and her willingness to voice her opinions and convictions, Sally's tolerance for enduring her father's entitlement is exhausted. She is tired of taking on the role of caretaker, especially when she feels exploited. His purchase of the Watson estate marks a watershed moment in her opinion of him. She had always thought he was ungrateful, but now she sees him as exploitative, greedy, and opportunistic. She hoped that by praying for her father to find a wife who would be able to take over the household duties, she would be relieved of the responsibility of caring for him. Her remaining threads of loyalty to him are severed when he criticizes her so harshly despite all she has sacrificed to care for him since her mother's death, and she begins to mount her resolve to find her way and place in the world. Part 6. Chapter 26. Woolley. No one is at Woolley's sister Sarah's house when he and Duchess arrive. The size of the house, as well as the 1941 Cadillac convertible Woolley inherited from his father and keeps in the garage, impresses Duchess. This is the car Emmett should take to California, according to the Duchess. They should, according to Woolley. Woolley takes an extra dose of his medicine after Duchess leaves to wait for Sarah, and Duchess leaves Woolley behind. Sarah keeps a key under the flower pot, according to Woolley. Woolley opens the door and inspects the house for any changes that have occurred while he has been away. His belongings are boxed up in his bedroom, and one of the four walls is painted blue. Woolley looks over the contents of the boxes, which include a cigar box containing his treasures and a dictionary. Woolley was relieved to know that any word he didn't know could be found, and investigated further by looking up definitions of other words. On the other hand, he despised the thesaurus that came with the dictionary, finding the layout confusing and perplexing. He set fire to the thesaurus at St. Mark's by taking it to the football field. A goalpost was engulfed by a trail of gasoline. Woolley dripped carelessly on the field. The fire, according to the disciplinary committee, was set deliberately. Woolley knew right then and there that no matter what he had to say, they were all going to take the side of the thesaurus, says Woolley. Sarah apologizes for his room when she comes back. She's expecting her first child, so she's converting his room into a nursery and setting up a room for Woolley near the back stairs. Sarah inquires as to his purpose for being present. Woolley and Duchess claim to be on leave, and Sarah claims to have spoken to their mother, who had received a call from the warden. Sarah tells Woolley that she called the warden and advocated for her brother. If Woolley returns to Selena, Warden Williams has agreed to be lenient with him. Sarah requests permission to contact the warden and inform him that Woolley will be returning. Woolley's attention shifts instead of responding. Sarah says she is on her way to Italy with her husband, and Woolley inquires about their mother. Remarrying is a betrayal for Woolley. Chapter 27. Duchess. To continue his accounting of accounts, Duchess seeks out Townhouse, Emmett's former bunkmate. Townhouse was beaten by Warden Ackerley, and Duchess feels he owes Townhouse a debt. An incident with another inmate, Tommy Ledoux, is also factored into Duchess' calculations. Tommy believed that because Townhouse is black, he should not be housed with white inmates. Tommy demanded that Townhouse limit his use of the bunkhouse to specific areas, and Emmett stepped in to stop him. Tommy and a guard had a conversation in which Tommy was given 2 boxes of Oreos, which Duchess happened to notice. Tommy snuck into Townhouse's footlocker and hid the Oreos there, which Duchess observed. Warden Ackerley, Bo, and other guards entered the bunkhouse the next morning and announced that someone had been stealing from the kitchen. They went on to search the footlocker at Townhouse, but came up empty-handed. To find the thief, the Duchess suggested searching everyone's footlocker. A box of Oreos was discovered in Tommy's locker. Duchess explains the situation to the other young men in the bunkhouse that night, while Tommy is in the penalty box, and they all split the remaining Oreo package. Duchess is questioned by Townhouse as to why he would risk so much for him. Reciting the St. Crispin's Day speech from Shakespeare's Henry V, Duchess claims it wasn't a risk, but rather an opportunity that presented itself, comparing them all to a united group. Following that, Townhouse approached Duchess and told her that he owed her for her safety. Duchess discovers Townhouse sitting on a stoop on 126th Street in Harlem, surrounded by a group of 4 young men. Throughout the conversation, Duchess is aware of the power dynamics among the young men on the stoop, with Townhouse commanding the group. The following night, the Duchess invites Townhouse to join them at the circus for the 6 p.m. performance. When Townhouse inquires as to why Duchess has traveled such a long distance to see him, Duchess explains that he needs to take a beating in exchange for the one Townhouse took after the escape to see Hondo settle his accounts. Duchess believes they'll be even if Townhouse hits her 3 times. Townhouse is perplexed by the whole thing, but Duchess is happy to accept the 3 blows if Townhouse agrees to deliver them. Duchess hands the keys to the Studebaker to Townhouse's associate Maurice as he walks out the door. Chapter 28. Emmett. Emmett is waiting in the Anchor at 7:45 for Harrison Hewitt, the same bar that Duchess had visited the day before. Emmett had walked a long distance to the subway, but had been unable to find his way around. He eventually found himself at the Statler Building in Manhattan's Times Square, which houses the offices of the TriStar Talent Agency, after correcting his errors. Emmett approaches the receptionist, explaining that all he requires is the contact information for a performer. Emmett walks out of the office and into the elevator, having been abruptly dismissed. The occupant of the elevator car props his umbrella between the doors as the elevator car is about to close, allowing Emmett to enter. The man explains that the receptionists are frequently approached by people seeking to resolve complaints, and as a result, the receptionists are notorious for refusing to share personal information about performers. Mr. Winslow suggests that instead of inquiring about the whereabouts of a specific performer, Emmett presents himself as looking to hire the actor in question by name. Upon arrival at McGinley & Co.'s offices, Emmett, dressed as a producer, is whisked away from the waiting room and into McGinley's office, where he asks for Harrison Hewitt by name. When Emmett asks Bernie about Harrison Hewitt, Bernie confirms that Duchess and Woolley are still staying at the Sunshine Hotel as guests. Emmett is told to go to the Anchor bar and ask Fitzy about Harrison Hewitt's whereabouts. Emmett introduces himself as a friend of Duchess and Fitzy admits that he told Duchess that Harrison Hewitt would be at the Olympic Hotel in Syracuse, as his schedule dictates. Fitzy invites Emmett to stay and share a drink with him, because he introduced himself as a family friend. Fitzy inquires as to Emmett's knowledge of the origins of Duchess moniker. Harrison used to refer to Duchess as the Duchess on nights when he was sent to pick up his father from the bar, and the nickname stuck. Fitzy inquires as to how Duchess came to be imprisoned at Salina, and when Emmett admits he has no idea, Fitzy proceeds to tell Emmett the story. Chapter 29. Ulysses. Ulysses and Billy have spent the day together in the abandoned train tracks camp, and the hour has just passed 10 o'clock. When Billy offers to read Ishmael's story to Ulysses, Ulysses requests that Billy read Ulysses' story again. Billy asks Ulysses if he'll tell him a story when he's finished. Ulysses tells Billy a story about my encounter with the King of the Winds, which he refers to as my own experience with the King of the Winds. Ulysses was on his way to the Des Moines train station to catch another train at the time. Ulysses began to notice oddities in his surroundings, indicating that something was wrong. Then in front of him, a long line of 15 cars sped by, all headed in the same direction. He noticed the sky was beginning to take on the telltale green hue of a looming tornado as he looked up. As a farmer was ushering his children into his storm cellar, Ulysses spotted a farmhouse in the distance and dashed toward it. Though the man does not refuse him outright, he does say, "I don't know you," and Ulysses admits that if he were in the man's shoes, he would not let an unknown man into his family's storm cellar, especially one of Ulysses' stature and a different race. The farmer explains that the nearest church is less than a mile away, and Ulysses should be able to get there in time to seek refuge in the basement. The tornado appears just as he gets halfway to the church, touching down and scattering debris in its wake, obstructing Ulysses' vision and impeding his progress. Ulysses ends up in the church cemetery, among the tombstones. Ulysses falls to the ground, tripping over a gravestone, believing he has been abandoned by God and must face the tornado on his own. When he stands up, he notices that he is standing in front of an open grave that has not yet been dug up. Ulysses speculates that the long caravan of cars was on its way to the funeral of the person encased in the casket, only to be hurried away as the tornado approached. Ulysses opens the casket and removes the man's body before tucking his inside and closing the lid. Redacted space in Ulysses' chapter indicates the blow to his head delivered by Pastor John in the present. Chapter 30. Pastor John. Pastor John raises his walking staff, bringing it down on Ulysses' head, convinced of his righteousness, and following a thought pattern in which the path of his vengeance resembled that of a tornado. Pastor John had been wounded in his ejection from the train, and his sole goal had been to find Ulysses and exact his revenge from the moment he was able to continue. Pastor John, believing he was being led by God, followed the rail lines, stowing away in boxcars until he came across Ulysses and Billy in the abandoned track camp, arriving just in time to hear Ulysses tell the story of the tornado, which was lying in wait for the perfect moment to strike. Pastor John asks if he can join Billy by the fire now that Ulysses has been knocked out, with a wicked laugh. Billy is grabbed by the shirt collar by Pastor John, and he begins to repeat his brother's name, just as he had done in the train car. Pastor John takes his broken staff in one hand and raises it above his head to strike Billy in the same way he struck Ulysses. Pastor John is surprised when Billy opens his eyes and says, "I am truly forsaken," allowing Billy to kick his injured knee, causing him to drop the boy in pain. Pastor John picks up a shovel to use as a crutch and pursues Billy, taunting him with menacing taunts. Pastor John hears another man's voice outside a tent and steps outside, thinking it's Ulysses, only to be stuck in the head by Pastor John's shovel. When more voices start to sound, Pastor John decides to focus his efforts on finding Billy's backpack rather than locating Billy. When he finds it by the fire, he empties it until he finds the coins in their tin. Then he shoulders the backpack. He realizes his shovel crutch is missing when he searches for it. Pastor John's chapter is broken up by redacted space to show Ulysses' shovel blowing to his head. Chapter 31. Ulysses. In his disorientation, Ulysses believes he is still in the coffin of the deceased man, where he left off in his recollection of the tornado, after waking up from the unconsciousness caused by the blow of Pastor John's walking staff. He tries to free himself, aware of his immobility, but oblivious to the fact that he was injured by Pastor John. Ulysses realizes where he is, after believing he has finally pushed the lid of the coffin open. Ulysses retreats into the darkness, knowing he needs to find Billy, so he can assess the situation around the campfire, and figure out where the boy is about their assailant, without alerting their assailant that he has arrived, and now poses a threat. He hears Stu calling his name and is struck by the shovel, then hears Pastor John talking to himself, and the contents of Billy's backpack being rifled through until he can sneak up on Pastor John and strike him on the side of the head with the shovel his attacker discarded. Ulysses begins seeing to the preacher, explaining to Billy that when Pastor John awakens, he will be furiously angry, and he should be far away from them. When Ulysses tells Billy he's going to take him down a flight of stairs away from the elevated tracks, Billy interrupts, assuming Ulysses will then take him to the police station. Ulysses accepts Stu's recommendation to take the stairs to Gansevoort and descend to the river, where he will throw Pastor John's unconscious body. Chapter 32. Duchess. Sarah comes in the middle of the night and starts making tea for Duchess, who is sitting in the dark in the kitchen. The Duchess notices a small brown bottle of pills she is carrying. When Duchess announces himself in the dark, she isn't startled, and she comes to sit at the table with him, with the pill bottle hidden in her robe pocket. Sarah inquires about Duchess and how he came to be at Selina while drinking her tea. The Sunshine Hotel was where Duchess was living with his father. Duchess became friends with another hotel guest, Marceline Maupassant, after being left alone for a long time. Marceline had a contract to perform in the United States, and she was well known throughout Europe. The stock market crash of 1929 occurred while Marceline was traveling by boat, and when he arrived in New York, he discovered that his contract had been canceled and that his finances in Paris had been destroyed by the crash. Marceline had turned to alcohol like Duchess's father, but he got up early to make crepes for Duchess and himself. Marceline's door, which was usually left ajar, was closed when Duchess arrived at Marceline's room one morning. Marceline had hung herself when Duchess entered. Harrison told Duchess to notify the police when he went to his father. Marceline's pride